that you have to spend a lot of money to have good travels in Europe. But I'm here to tell you, you don't have to be rich to travel well. My junior year of college, I spent 4 months studying abroad in Florence, Italy. And while I was there, I traveled so much around Europe that I came up with kind of 5 fundamental tips for having a really good experience traveling in Europe. So I wanted to share them with you today so that I can kind of help you if you decide to travel to Europe, but it also applies to traveling in general. My first tip is to visit during the off-season. I know that a lot of people don't like to do this because the weather isn't as nice, and I understand that, but I studied abroad during the off-season and I still had an incredible time even though the weather may not have been perfect all the time. During the off-season, which is normally November to I think about April or May, it looks more like what is on the left. The streets aren't as crowded, there aren't hardly any tourists because the weather isn't as nice, but that's a really good opportunity to meet locals because a lot of the people that are roaming the streets are the locals to the city that you're in because they tend to travel during the tourist season to get away from the big crowds. So you won't have to stand in as long lines and you can kind of immerse yourself in the culture more because there aren't so many tourists everywhere. During the peak season, it looks more like what is on the right and honestly sometimes worse than that. I was in Florence, Italy, and sometimes the line for the Duomo was wrapping around the entire Duomo, and it's a massive building and it could take you hours to get in. So no matter what, I think if you travel during the off-season or during the peak season, you're obviously going to have an incredible time. But I just personally recommend trying the off-season because it might be worth it. My second tip is to fly on budget airlines. These airlines include Ryanair, EasyJet, JetBlue, or not JetBlue, that's here, or Wizz Air, among a few others. But generally, I would travel on these for about 20 to 65 euros one way, and that is so incredibly cheap to travel compared to what our prices are in the United States. And the thing that's really incredible about these airlines is that your trips are really 2 hours or less, and so you don't need a terribly luxurious airline to travel on, but you get to be spontaneous about your travels. You could book your trip 2 days ahead of, or 2 days before you're leaving, and maybe only spend 30 euros to go one way, which is really affordable. Once you get to the destinations, I highly recommend speaking the language. Now, no locals are going to expect you to be able to speak the language fluently because that's just unrealistic unless you already know the language. And you also shouldn't be expected of yourself to speak every language fluently because that's just not going to happen. But you can learn common phrases to really immerse yourself in the culture, and the locals are really going to appreciate that you're doing, and it might spark some really cool conversations. A lot of common phrases that I would learn before I would travel were hello, goodbye, thank you, please, hi, my name is. You also might learn how much is this, or can I have the check? And they're really going to appreciate you doing this because it's showing that you're respecting their culture and you're trying to kind of immerse yourself into their culture and really appreciate their country while you're there. Kind of along with speaking the language is meeting new people. When I was there, my experience would not have been what it was and if I hadn't met all of the incredible people that I met. I know that a lot of the time you go with maybe your spouse or your family or friends when you're traveling and you tend to just stick with them. But even with them, you should get out and you should meet fellow travelers and you should meet the locals because they know so much about the different places that they've been or the places that they live. I would talk to a lot of travelers about the countries they had been to or the cities that they had been to, and I learned a lot about what to do there, what not to do there, and it was really helpful with my travels. You can also hear really incredible stories. With meeting the locals, they know the best places to eat food, the best places to visit, when to visit, and it can really give you the most genuine experience of being in that city and learning that city from a local's perspective. The people on the left was a group of girls that I met in Prague, And they actually happened to be studying abroad in Florence and lived about 2 blocks from where I lived in Florence, but we had just met randomly in Prague. And then this right here is Gemma, and this is Elisa, and they were my English for Pasta family in Italy. And I got to spend every Thursday night with them, eating dinner at their house. And they would help me learn Italian better and teach me more about the art and the food and the culture. And I would help them with their English because they were both pretty beginner level in English at the time. So it's just a really cool experience to kind of embrace the people there and to learn more from them because they have a lot to tell. And it's crazy how much Europeans know about their country and the art and the food and all of the history is far more than I knew about any of it. My last piece of advice is to get a little lost. And I don't mean literally get so lost that you have no idea where you are and you can't find your hotel or your car. I just mean embrace going to places that you didn't expect that you would be going to. It's really important to try maybe going down a street that you don't recognize and seeing what's there. Or if there's a really cool building you see, go into the building and find out what that building is. Both of these places were places that I found randomly while I was abroad. On the left, my friends and I had gone to the train station in Florence and we said, okay, let's find the cheapest train ticket in Italy and see where it takes us. So I think we found one that was €8 both ways, and it took us to Livorno, Italy, and then we took a random bus along the coast, and we ended up here and spent 5 hours hanging out, walking along these cliffs and watching the sunset. And it was one of my favorite experiences while I was abroad. On the right is a random park that I found in Barcelona because I saw the park entrance, and I walked in and ended up finding the most beautiful fountain I've ever seen in my entire life. So in Europe, you really don't know what's around every corner, and so I encourage you to really embrace going to places that you didn't expect you would be. So these 5 things were really things that as I traveled more, I learned to do, and as I started to kind of use all 5 of these things on my trips, I felt like I was having a more enriching experience on my travels. So again, visit during the off-season, fly on budget airlines, speak the language, meet new people, and get a little lost. Thank you.